Join with my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus to pay homage to the black men and women of our armed forces whose service and sacrifices have far too often gone unrecognized and underappreciated. And to make matters worse, they have often been denied their proper and well-deserved benefits as veterans who proudly served our nation. There has been no war or conflict in which this country has been involved that blacks did not participate. The men and women we are honoring tonight as we commemorate the 100th year of celebrating Black history made memorable and consequential contributions to the greatness of this country. And it should not be insulting to any red-blooded American to hear about them and to read about them and learn about them in the same manner that we learn about others whose contributions were similar, but their skin color made them more worthy. When we hear stories of the American Revolution, we don't often hear of Crispus Attucks, a black man who became the first casualty of the American Revolution when he was the first of 5 colonists shot and killed on March 5th, 1770, in what became known as the Boston Massacre. His murder stirred the revolutionary fervor that America's fight for its liberation from the British. So why is it that all of us were taught about the Boston Tea Party, but nothing about the Boston Massacre? The life of Crispus Attucks is far less documented than his death. Crispus Attucks escaped from slavery in Framingham, Massachusetts in 1750 and spent 2 decades on trading ships and whaling vessels. His death continues to serve as a reminder that African Americans took an active role in the path to American independence, not a passive one. The poet John Boyd O'Reilly celebrated Attucks as, and I quote, the first to defy, the first to die. In his 1994 book, Why We Can't Wait, Martin Luther King Jr. pays homage to Attucks for his courage and defining role in the American Revolution. Why don't our textbooks? In his 1881 autobiography, Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, Douglass wrote, "I urge every man who could enlist to get an eagle on his button, a musket on his shoulder, the Star-Spangled Banner over his head, and there is no power on earth which can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship in the United States." Douglass believed the Civil War offered the black soldier an opportunity to gain his stripes, but he could not convince his friend, Abraham Lincoln, to allow blacks to serve. But in August 1862, a formerly enslaved black man from South Carolina came here to Washington and convinced Lincoln to allow blacks to serve and to serve. History records that 170,000 blacks joined the Union Army and 19,000 joined the Union Navy, and 40,000 died in that war. Robert Smalls, who convinced Abraham Lincoln to allow these freedmen to serve, became a captain in that Navy, participated in 18 battles, and was the only genuine hero of the Civil War. And in my not so humble opinion, is the most consequential South Carolinian who ever lived. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln acknowledged their value, saying, and I quote, "Without the military help of the black freedmen, the war could not have been won." In what textbook do we find that? I would say very few, if any. World War II saw the service of many African Americans who never got their just due in or out of the military. My father had two brothers. Both of them, William and Charlie, served in World War I. And every time I tried to engage them in conversations about their experiences in that war, they never, ever would discuss them. They made it very clear to me that the treatment they got, both in that war and when they came back home, made them wonder what they were fighting for. World War II, much of the same. If I were to mention tonight Montford Point Marines, I would suspect very few, if any, in this hall would recognize them. Well, Montford Point Marines were those black Marines who were not allowed to be trained at Camp Lejeune alongside white soldiers. They were sent to a mosquito-infested swamp in Montford Point, and that's where they served from 1942 all the way down to 1949. And I'm pleased that this body, in its wisdom, saw it fitting and proper to give the Congressional Gold Medal to those Montford Point Marines in such a way, I would think, was offering an apology for the way they were treated while they were serving. Now, I would mention, in speaking of World War II, Tuskegee Airmen. And everybody would know about the Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces, flying over 15,000 combat missions that played a vital role in the Allied victory in World War II. Instead of being defined by the discrimination and the doubts of those around them, they became one of the most successful squadrons, pursuit squadrons, in our military. They went on to embody the true meaning of black excellence. They left a segregated country to fight in a segregated army and painfully return to a country that still did not treat them with the dignity and the respect that they deserved and had earned. They had movies made about them, the Red Tails, but they were not given their GI Bill benefits. On July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the armed forces so there would be no more Montford Point Marines. Truman declared there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. Many servicemen wrote to President Truman. Perhaps the most pivotal letter that Truman got came from Isaac Woodard Jr., a World War II veteran who, hours after being honorably discharged from the United States Army, was dragged off a bus and beaten to near death, blinded by police in Blacksburg, Leesville, South Carolina. In response to Woodward's letter, President Truman declared, and I'm quoting Truman, when a mayor and city marshal, I want to repeat this, when a mayor and city marshal can take a Negro sergeant off a bus in South Carolina, beat him up, and put out his eyes, and nothing is done about it by the state authorities, something is radically wrong with the system. End of Truman's quote. In January 2025, President Trump made the decision to stop teaching about Air Force recruits about the Tuskegee Airmen in the name of banning DEI initiatives. Their heroism is not DEI, it's an American history. Sergeant Woodard deserved better treatment because of his sacrifices. President Truman decided it was time to close a chapter on one part of American history. Other black soldiers returning home from World War II found themselves facing the same socioeconomic and racial discrimination they had faced before going off to war. Instead of being welcomed back home with open arms, they struggled to find jobs, to get an education, and to purchase homes. We cannot undo the injustices of our past, but we can begin to restore the possibility of full economic mobility for those that the original GI Bill left behind. That's why I have sponsored for several years now the GI Bill Restoration Act that would bring us one step closer to that goal. America can't change what happened to these black soldiers. We can't change what happened to many soldiers like Sergeant Woodard, who went uncelebrated because our nation judged them by the color of their skin and not the content of their character, but we can do our best to make it right. And that begins with us passing my legislation that I co-lead with Congressman Seth Moulton, the Sergeant Woodard Jr. and Sergeant Joseph H. Maddox GI Bill Restoration Act. But we didn't stop with World War II. Just 2 years after Truman issued his executive order, we began to desegregate the armed forces. And there we were in the Korean War, and we put Truman's executive order into action and was greeted with resistance. Truman's 1948 executive order inspired many black men to join, believing the military would provide an equality of opportunity the greater American society lacked. It was in the Korean War that African Americans first served shoulder to shoulder with soldiers of all races and backgrounds. A message resounded throughout the nation. If people of different races could serve as comrades in combat abroad, they could live as neighbors at home. The quest for racial equality extended far past the barracks or on the battlefield. But that same quest for racial equality returned home with black soldiers. I often think about our former colleague, the late Congressman Charlie Rangel. At the age of 17, Charlie Rangel left school and joined the Army to help his mother support his family. Soon after his enlistment, in 1948, he deployed to Korea for what he thought was a police action, but soon realized it was a full-scale war. With a fighting spirit, he found himself in combat during the Korean War and risked his life to rescue 40 soldiers from behind enemy lines. Returning home to Harlem, New York, Rangel was first elected to Congress in 1970. He would go on to serve 23 terms in this body. Mr. Rangel was a proud co-founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. Today, America is faced with a turbulent reality as the Trump administration is still trying to purge our United States Armed Forces of black officers, diversity, and honoring black history. In February 2025, President Donald Trump fired General Charles C.Q. Brown, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The words Trump used to justify his firing, and I quote, woke and DEI. C.Q. Brown was the Air Force's first black commander of the Pacific Air Forces, and later, the first black chief of staff. What is woke about being a commander of the Pacific Air Forces? None of the other commanders before him were called woke. They were all called commanders. So why was he called woke and fired? Well, I think we all know why. in March 2025. Part of Project 2025. Arlington National Cemetery erased from its website educational materials about the history of Black service members, including the Tuskegee Airmen and General Colin Powell, the first Black Joint Chief Chairman. Why? Why are we erasing these people from the website and not anybody else? We know why. Let me be clear. The White House and the so-called Department of War appear determined to undermine, discredit, and even erase the evidence of Black patriotism and Black service members who have faithfully served our nation. Against this backdrop, we must remain vigilant against these attacks on Black servicemen and veterans, recognize their valor and sacrifice, and work diligently to offer them the promise of this country that they deserve. May Black military service in triumph and tragedy always serve as a powerful reminder that the stories of sacrifice and patriotism must never be erased, regardless of who embodies them. In all too many instances, Black veterans have had to fight for equal access to benefits and respect upon returning home. Black veterans have struggled and died in a dual battle, fighting abroad in defense of country and fighting at home for opportunity, change, and their rights as American citizens. Millions of Black Americans have answered the call to serve and protect the American people from all threats, both foreign and domestic. Today, 350,000 Black men and women serve in the United States military, and there are over 2.4 million Black veterans, many of whom still are not getting the GI Bill benefits that they deserve, and this body is still refusing to honor legislation that would give them what they deserve. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank Congresswoman Betty for joining me in this special hour, and I wish to yield to her now to continue this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Speaker, it is a great honor for me to rise today to co-anchor this Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour alongside my distinguished colleague, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina. And so you see, Mr. Speaker, and to all those who are listening and watching tonight, it is not only our 100th anniversary of Black History Month, but it is just that. It is our history, as Mr. Clyburn has so aptly outlined. And so for the remainder of our first hour, you will hear from us. We will speak directly to the American people on an issue of deep importance to our caucus, to the House, to the communities we represent, and to our nation. And as we observe Black History Month, Today's special hour is dedicated to recognizing the contributions, achievements, sacrifices of Black military service members and veterans. And I cannot think of a better person than our leader, the woman that leads the Congressional Black Caucus, who hails from New York's 9th District. You'll hear tonight a lot about legacies, Black legacies. You will hear about challenges and barriers, but how we have prevailed. When I think about Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, I think about Black legacy. I think about when we talk about how Black servicemen and women stood on the shoulders. I think about our leader, Yvette Clarke, who stands on the shoulders of her constituents in Brooklyn, New York. I think about Yvette Clarke, who stands on her mother's shoulders, someone, a pioneer, and someone who understood what we need to do to preserve our Black history. And so I ask you to listen carefully as this powerful Black woman comes to us and presents why we are here. Because she leads us as we honor Black legacy, Black founders, and we honor the legacy that she will leave. And let us listen to the stories of Black military service people, stories too often overlooked or erased. Mr. Speaker, it is my great honor to ask my leader, my friend, the Honorable Yvette Clarke.
Good evening. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, proudly representing New York's 9th Congressional District, located in Brooklyn, New York. I want to thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, a real champion for the people of Ohio, and Congressman Jim Clyburn, leadership extraordinaire, for co-anchoring this Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour. Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight with my colleagues of the Congressional Black Caucus to again commemorate the centennial of Black History Month and to reflect on the innumerable contributions to our country that Black Americans have made throughout our nation's history. Black History Month offers our community a time to celebrate our hidden figures and impactful heroes, including our Black veterans and service members. Today, we honor the generations of Black veterans whose courage, advocacy, sacrifice, and patriotism have moved our country and world forward. Since our nation's founding, our military has relied on Black Americans to answer the call to serve. Quite frankly, prior to our founding. From the Revolutionary War and Crispus Attucks, to Harriet Tubman, spy, scout, nurse, and cook for the Union Army during the Civil War. From the Tuskegee Airmen, the valiant and courageous Red Tails, to the brilliant and extraordinary 688. Black women and men have always been on the front lines, standing for the values that make our nation great. With such a storied legacy of service to our nation, it is unfortunate that racially discriminatory practices have for too long obstructed Black veterans from equally accessing veterans' benefits like housing, education, and health care. From the denial of the GI Bill benefits, effectively shutting nearly 1.2 million Black veterans out of its promise. Decades of discrimination have produced profound and lasting economic consequences for Black service members and their families. Today, Black veterans account for nearly a third of our nation's unhoused veteran population, and Black veterans are nearly 2 times as likely to live in poverty. These years of discriminatory practices against our nation's Black veterans have only been compounded by the administration's recent actions within the Department of Defense. From eliminating equitable practices that benefit our diverse military leadership, to creating a hostile environment that Black veterans have warned will deter a diverse population of prospective service members, to removing evidence of the historical impacts of Black service women and men, this administration is committed to further marginalizing our nation's heroes. It is important that we never forget the unique history and contribution of our nation's Black veterans. As the conscience of the Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus refuses to allow the sacrifices of these patriotic Americans, Black Americans, to go unnoticed or to be erased. We will never be able to fully repay our veterans given the sacrifices they've made to our country. But as a Congress, it is our responsibility to make sure we do all we can to ensure that they have what they need when they return home. I want to thank my colleagues of the Congressional Black Caucus for their commitment to supporting our nation's veterans and for recognizing the role that Black veterans play in American history and to this very day within our U.S. military. With that, I yield back to the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your comments this evening. Thank you so much for your leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus, and thank you for allowing me to co-chair this special hour with our friend, Congresswoman George Beatty. And I would like to yield to George now because I think she has a few historical notations that I think all of our viewers and listeners will benefit from hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Tonight we stand here, and while we talk about the celebration of Black history and Black military men and women, we want to remind everyone that Black history is American history. And I am sure when Carter G. Woodson was thinking about Black history 100 years ago, I know he was not intending it to be only for 1 month, but for us to kick it off, I'd like to say, in February and continue it for the rest of the year. Tonight, we're reminded that Black military history is not a footnote, it is foundational. From the Revolutionary War to today's all-volunteer force, Black service members have defended this nation with courage, with discipline and sacrifice, even when this nation did not fully defend them in return. Their service helped win wars. Their leadership strengthened our institutions. Their resilience expanded the promise of American democracy. So as we observe Black History Month, let us commit not only to remembering this history, but to protecting it, teaching it, and honoring those who continue to serve today. Because the strength of our military and the strength of our democracy depend on truth, inclusion, and the respect of those who have carried the burden of service. Black Americans have served in the United States military since the Revolutionary War, with over 350,000 currently serving on active duty or in the reserves, making up approximately 20% of enlisted personnel. As of 2025, 21% of Army soldiers, Black or African American, leadership, while represented in the enlisted ranks, they are underrepresented in the highest leadership levels. Although 40% of the total active duty force consists of people of color. You have heard about Robert Smalls becoming the first Black captain in the United States Navy during the Civil War. You've heard about Colin Powell, the first Black command chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the list goes on and on. Now, we've heard a lot about men, and we've heard about the women who were out there in the fight during the early years fighting for our democracy and freedom. But I am reminded, Mr. Clyburn, when you talked about the Tuskegee Airmen, that yes, it was during World War II that First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt used her platform as a military advocate to challenge segregation and to elevate excellence in the armed forces. She publicly championed the Tuskegee Airmen, whose skills and discipline shattered the lies used to justify exclusion and proved that racism, not readiness, was the real barrier. You see, they were black, for anyone who might not know that. And by flying with one of them as her pilot, Roosevelt sent an unmistakable message that standing with black service members was an act of patriotism and put country over hate. But that leads me to someone who lived much of her life until she died in my hometown. Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early, who I finally called Aunt Charity, who mentored me and who taught me much of what I know today, and who always reminded me of barriers and challenges, but always said, move forward and go forward and do those things that will make a difference. You see, she was the first black woman officer in the Women's Army Corps, commanded the 6888, the Central Postal Directory Battalion, the only all-black, all-female unit deployed overseas during World War II. Stationed in Europe, her battalion was tasked with clearing a massive backlog of undelivered mail, millions of letters and packages that carriers hoped that the service members would receive, those who were far from home. But this wasn't an ordinary task. It was warehouses for miles and miles. It was given to them because no one else had been able to do it. And certainly those white officers felt that nor would they be able to do it, and it was punishment. But Mr. Speaker, they didn't know the power of black women. And I want to say thank you to Charity Edna Early and all those that served with her and their families. Because, see, they completed the mission, not only on time, but in record time, delivering those messages from parents and children and friends and loved ones and restoring the morale in the midst of war. Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early was the commanding officer in the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. And they were honored just recently here in Congress with the Congressional Gold Medal for her extraordinary work during World War II services. And I am so proud that I could be there that day to witness her family, her two children, Judith and Stanley, as we stood together as she and others were honored. You see, the statistics are long and they are strong about what we have done. And Mr. Clyburn, I thank you for being our historian, for reminding us from the earliest days of this nation that Black Americans have stepped forward to serve, even while enslaved, segregated, and denied basic rights. During the American Revolution, Black patriots fought in the Continental Army. And just this summer, as our nation marked the birthday of the United States Army, we also lifted up Black heroes too often left out of history. Men like you've mentioned, Salem Poor, Peter Salem, James Armistead Lafayette, who served in the Continental Army where it all began. So, Mr. Clyburn, I thank you for allowing me to share a small part in this. And we could go on, but certainly I'd be remiss if I didn't mention during the Civil War, Black service and leadership continued. including the extraordinary contributions of Harriet Tubman. Tubman served as a nurse, an intelligence operative, and a scout. She was part of a movement, part of an army, providing crucial information on Confederate movements and supply lines. And in 1863, she planned and guided the ferry raid, destroying Confederate supplies and freeing more than 700 enslaved people, becoming the first American woman to lead a military operation. Her leadership saved lives, weakened the Confederacy, and reshaped the meaning of military service. So thank you, Mr. Clyburn, for allowing me to share that part, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding back the time, and I inquire how much time we have left.
The gentleman has 19 minutes remaining. 19 minutes.
19. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to mention a little bit of history here that I think is very meaningful and help to make the point that I really want to make tonight. I attended public and private schools in South Carolina, great schools, before going off to South Carolina State, now University. And when I came to Congress, the South Carolina State had given or produced more African-American general officers than all the military service academies combined. That one little school in Orangeburg, South Carolina. To date, if my memory serves, they have produced 23 general officers. That school was founded in 1896 as what we call an 1890 land-grant school. Because when the land-grant schools were first put into production, it was 1862. In fact, the land-grant bill was signed by Abraham Lincoln. And of course, these institutions in the South, like Clemson University in South Carolina, did not allow African Americans to serve. Now, if you look at the legislation that created the Morrill Act, which I have studied, it says that it is to teach agriculture and mechanics. And so we see on a lot of these schools, A&M. In fact, I spent last Friday on the campus of Florida A&M in Tallahassee, Florida. Now, Florida A&M stands for agriculture and mechanical. But in that law, there's another M that very seldom get recognized. And the Morrill Act lists this as part of the training these institutions should undertake. Military. It's in the law. And some of these schools, like South Carolina State, have taken that seriously. And over the years, other land-grant schools like Tuskegee Institute now, I just mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen who came online during World War II. But after the war, we had contributions from people like Daniel Chappie James. Now, I like to mention Daniel Chappie James because I remember as a kid in those schools I was attending in South Carolina, I would hear all this stuff and read this stuff about Jimmy Doolittle. Well, I've read up on Jimmy Doolittle. He was an outstanding military person, but his resume does not touch the resume of Daniel Chappie James, who became the first African-American four-star general in the Air Force. And Chappie James fought in both the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And in both those wars, he flew 160 missions and is credited with having shot down 26 enemy planes. Where in these textbooks do we hear any discussion of Chappie James? I've never been able to understand what is it about folks who feel that to give one person credit for having done what they did takes something away from another person's contributions. We all believe in this great country, in no need of being made great. It's already great. We all got to learn how to work together so that everybody can benefit from the greatness of this country. It doesn't take anything away from a child sitting in the class with my grandchildren, learning about the contributions, learning about Chappie James. How can that be an insult? It's no insult to my children to learn about Jimmy Doolittle. So why is it an insult to learn about Chappie James? Why? Is it okay for everybody to enjoy the baseball skills of Jackie Robinson? And that's all right to put in the books his contributions to sports. But before Jackie Robinson ever set foot on Ebbets Field, he was in the military. He served honorably in the United States military. And that's been recognized by our military institutions. So why would this administration take Jackie Robinson's military records out of our archives? It's okay for him to be a baseball player. It's okay for him to entertain. But not okay for us to recognize him for his military skills. That to me, I don't quite understand. I don't understand why it is that we let all these contributions of entertainers be celebrated. But when it comes to academia, when it comes to the military, it all becomes wokeness. I have yet to hear one person apply that term to sports people, entertainers. That, to me, tells it all. And so I think that as we pause to recognize not just the 100th anniversary of the Black history celebration. I want to say something about that too, because I really get a little nervous when I hear people misrepresent the history of this. Now, Carter G. Woodson started in 1915 and 16 trying to get our country to recognize what he called Black History Week. And he finally got the country, I think 1926, to recognize it. And it became Black History Week. And when I was a student, that's when we celebrated it. But I want the record to be clear, because I want our history to be what it is, not what somebody says it is. Carter G. Woodson was offered the opportunity to designate the week that we should celebrate Black history. It was Carter G. Woodson who decided that it should be in February. Now, the reason he picked the week he did, because he wanted to embrace the birthdays of two people. February 12th, the birthday of Abraham Lincoln. February 14th, the birthday of Frederick Douglass. That's why it was done. And thanks to the visionary leadership of President Gerald Ford. Maybe Gerald Ford was a woke president. It was Gerald Ford who decided that we should have Black History Month. He made that decision. Was Gerald Ford a woke president? I think he was an enlightened president, a mature thinker. And I would hope that we will all get to the place in our society that we are mature enough to step outside of our comfort zone sometime, mature enough to recognize the contributions of others, mature enough to have in our textbooks the contributions of people that we call geniuses. You know, it's okay for us to learn about the light bulb, but we don't seem to want to learn everything about the light bulb. The fact that bulb couldn't work until Lewis Latimer's filament got put in it. It was Lewis Latimer's filament. Lewis Latimer, the son of former slaves, who collaborated with Thomas Edison. Edison's bulb, Lewis Latimer, filament, makes it work. Thomas Edison was mature enough to step outside of his comfort zone and sit down with the son of former slaves, Lewis Latimer, and get his filament to put in his light bulb. And Lewis Latimer was mature enough to collaborate with Thomas Edison. I would hope that all of us in this body can get mature enough to recognize everybody's contributions and not be insulted by what may be the contributions of one as opposed to another. So I want to thank you, Ms. Beatty, for joining me in this special hour. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope I have not tested your time tonight.
How much time do we have left?
Got a little more time.
I'm sorry?
He said we have time left.
How much time do you have left? 4 minutes. You have about 4 minutes left.
I do have 4 minutes. Well, I'd like to yield 2 of those minutes to Joyce Beatty, and she could take off 4 if she wants.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say thank you for not only giving us information about blacks serving in the military, but also reminding us of our rich history and how everyone benefits. Thus, Black history is American history. But let us be clear. America cannot move forward by erasing the people who propelled it forward. Currently, this administration is looking to erase the impact of women and Black Americans from our military, from brutal attacks on Black history to Secretary Hessex attempting to remove women from combat roles. The message is clear. Clearly, President Trump does not value the contributions of Black Americans or women in our nation's military, but still they rise. Still we rise because we understand that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And today that legacy lives on through the more than 350,000 Black Americans currently serving in uniform and more than 2 million Black Americans who are veterans. They serve with that same courage, that same resilience, that same excellence as those who came before them. And Mr. Clyburn, thanks for reminding us about being woke, because the opposite is being asleep. And I'm sure we don't want anyone to not be woke when they're fighting for our freedom, when they're fighting for our justice. So as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, in this Congress, I ask that we remember the things that we shared and we move forward with an open mind and a mind of the words that we so frequently say: freedom and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Clyburn, and I'll yield back the balance for you to close us out.
How much time do you have left? 2 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to close in something a bit more general, because I have been wrestling with this for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years. And it's Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham City Jail. King, when he wrote that letter, said something that I want to leave us with tonight. King was told that the officials in Birmingham wanted him to leave Birmingham because they said he was the disruptive force, and they thought that his cause was right, but his timing was wrong. And King wrote this to those people who wrote him the letter. He said, "Time is never right. Time is never wrong. Time is always what we make it." And then he concluded that he was coming to the belief that the people of ill will in our society was making a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And then he closed saying, "We are going to be made to repent, not just for the vitriolic words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people." There are a lot going on in our country today for which we need to speak up about. And if we remain silent, we are going to be made to repent. And we may see that our democracy is no longer with us. And I'll yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Under Speaker's announcement policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Herodopoulos, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today we rise to discuss the important issue of home affordability. As you just saw on this floor, we passed with bipartisan support, led by our chairman of the Financial Services Committee, French Hill, from the great state of Arkansas, a 390-9 vote to promote the idea of home affordability, the ultimate American dream. But sadly, as we've recognized over the last few years, that dream has come further and further away for too many Americans. But starting today, we are moving in the right direction so that we might reduce those barriers to affordability and simply rely on the great economic lesson of increasing supply will reduce the costs. So our first speaker tonight is from the state of Kentucky, who serves on our Financial Services Committee. And with that, I recognize the Congressman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Housing for the 21st Century Act, a bill that advances exactly what Americans voted for: fewer bureaucrats, more builders, lower costs, and real results. Right now, families across America are still recovering from Biden-era inflation, sky-high interest rates, and a Washington regulatory state that makes it harder and more expensive to build a home. The radical left's answer is always more government, more mandates, more red tape. Well, that's how we got into this mess. Republicans have a better answer: build more homes, faster, better, and cheaper. The solution to inflation, the solution to higher costs, is always more supply. The reason why we have the affordability challenges in housing, Mr. Speaker, is because we have an inventory shortage. And Republicans are offering solutions to provide more housing stock to lower the cost for the American people and deliver on that American dream of homeownership. This bill cuts through the regulatory chokehold that Washington has imposed on housing. It streamlines permitting, modernizes outdated federal programs, and gets the federal government out of the way so builders can do what they do best: build. It empowers local communities, not central